All right. I totally understand. I'm a teacher. I understand what a big decision and an important decision curriculum choice can be. You want to do your research prior to picking a curriculum. You want that curriculum to be a good fit, not only for your teachers, but for your students as well. I always make a joke that it's like choosing a mattress or a car, right? It's one of those decisions that you have to do. You know you're going to have it for a long time, so you better make the right decision when you do that. So we need to ask ourselves the question, what should good science teaching look like? What would this look like in a classroom? And we all need to be on the same page. When you are choosing curriculum for your district or your school, everybody on that committee needs to be on that same page. So on your screen right now is a list of things that if you are NGSS aligned, we should see more of in a classroom. I have a list of things we should see less of. We should see less of students learning a bunch of facts that are totally disconnected from any phenomenon and disconnected from each other. We should see less of the teacher as the sage on a stage, imparting pearls of wisdom to students. That focus should be on students rather than on the teacher. We should see less of questions that have a single right answer. More questions that are open-ended, allowing for student discourse along the way. And we should see much less of students simply reading a textbook and filling out a bunch of worksheets. And if we can all agree on that, then we can move into the next step. How should these lessons be designed? Well, there is an NGSS learning cycle, and it looks something like this. Lessons should begin with a phenomenon. And then students are going to use the science and engineering practices to unlock the phenomenon. In other words, students are doing the work. All right, so they're exposed to this phenomenon, and a phenomenon does not need to be phenomenal. I'm actually a big proponent of phenomena that are local and personally observed by students. Water sweating on a glass. If you happen to live near a cornfield and the corn is growing different heights, whatever that phenomenon might be, that's local and personal to students. It doesn't have to be, but when it is, it's so much more powerful because students begin observing their world in a new way. They start looking at things around them in a very different way. As we unlock this phenomenon with the science and engineering practices, the students then begin to construct their idea of the disciplinary core ideas. As they construct their own understanding of these disciplinary core ideas, they can use the cross-cutting concepts to connect to other ideas they've already learned. Now, what happens is this leads to new phenomena, new questions, and this learning cycle repeats itself again and again and again in an NGSS-aligned classroom. Again, beginning with the phenomenon, unlocking some aspect of it using those science and engineering practices, and then building their own core ideas. But what does this actually look like in a curriculum? That is the million-dollar question, right? If we knew that, we would all be rich and famous. So there are a lot of tools out there that you can use to look at curricula and decide if it in fact meets these learning cycle criteria. The most famous one would be the EQUIP rubric. It is thorough, but on the flip side of that, it is also pretty cumbersome. It takes a district committee many hours to use, and a lot of just hard work digging in and looking through curricula, trying to decide if it meets all these aspects of this EQUIP rubric. Some of you might be familiar with a gentleman by the name of Paul Anderson. He has a wonderful website called The Wonder of Science. I've worked closely with him over the last 3 or 4 years. And one of the things we developed was this lesson screening tool. There's also an assessment screening tool, and these are quick. They're not as comprehensive as EQUIP, but it gives you a pretty good idea whether you're meeting the mark right off at the beginning, and then you can choose to dig in deeper. I like to, again, say this is a screening tool. If it doesn't meet these criteria, you probably shouldn't even look at it after that. So there's 2 words out there that are thrown around when we're looking at curriculum. One is aligned and one is designed. So what is the difference between these two? And should this matter to you as you begin to look at curriculum? I can tell you the unfortunate truth is that you can go on to many resources, Better Lesson, Teachers Pay Teachers, the National Science Teachers Association, other educational publishing resource sites, and they will say that they have materials that are aligned to the NGSS standards. In fact, many of them are not designed to support the standards. They fall way short of the mark, and I'm hoping today that I can show you how that is. These do not generally encourage higher order thinking. They do not allow students to use the science and engineering practices. They fail to develop student mastery in the ability to face any question. And that really is the goal of NGSS, that we form students that are flexible in their thinking so that when they are faced with a different problem, they can use the science and engineering practices, the cross-cutting concepts, to unlock that phenomenon as well. All of these things NGSS requires, and many of what we look at online that claim to be aligned fall very short of the mark. So here is a sample curriculum. It's a first grade lesson plan, and it claims to be aligned to the NGSS. In fact, it begins with the performance expectation right at the beginning of the lesson plan. And the PE says that students should plan and conduct investigations to provide evidence about vibrations. All right, so the two big things here, planning the investigation and that there should be some talk of vibrations along the way. As you look through this lesson plan, you can see that basically students are listening to sounds around their school. They begin by, what sounds can we hear in our school? Record answers on an anchor chart. Then they go on a listening walk. Then when the class returns, we report our findings of what we heard, and then they read a book about sound. Now on the surface, this is a 5E lesson. It starts with the performance expectation. It looks like it should be really awesome. And it's aligned. So a teacher could grab this and say, this is great for my classroom. But when you look at this, at no point in the 5Es are students actually planning an investigation. And there's no talk of vibrations in there anywhere. So it definitely falls short of the mark. And remember, this was an aligned lesson. Now I'd like to show you the actual PE for this. I'm sure many of you have seen this, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but just to refresh your memory, right? That each PE is divided into 3 dimensions, and it clearly spells out what students should be using as terms of the science and engineering practices, what cross-cutting concepts students are using in that lesson. And those 2 are going to be used to scaffold student understanding of this disciplinary core idea. It is a 3-dimensional performance expectation. All 3 dimensions should be explicitly taught in a lesson. Most people are familiar with this, but this really isn't the whole story when we look at the NGSS standards. NGSS also provides evidence statements for each performance expectation. And this is almost like a checklist. These are things that I want to see in a lesson. I want to see students doing. If students can show me that they're doing this, I'm pretty sure that they're going to meet that PE. So let me highlight a few things on here. Remember, plan was a big part of that PE. In the evidence statements, students collaboratively develop an investigation plan. Now remember, this is first grade. We don't expect students in first grade to develop their own investigation plan. That's why the word collaboratively is there. We don't want to just send them off on their way. We want to instruct them, right? So it's a collaborative investigation plan. Notice that they have to make observations about vibrations, and that they have to collect and record the observations. They have to decide what they're how to observe, and then they have to record those observations. I'm sure you'll all agree this is very different than the lesson plan we just looked at. If this is a checklist of what students are expected to do, that lesson definitely falls short of the mark. It might be aligned. There is some aspect of it that is addressing some aspect of the PE, but it isn't actually designed to meet this checklist. Now here's the same PE first grade, sounds and vibrations, in our WAS curriculum. We begin with students drawing a model. They look at a drum and they have to draw a model of how we're hearing that. The goal of this is to just get student initial thinking visible for the teacher. This does two things for us. Number one, it allows the teacher to see where all of her students are at so that teacher moves can be planned throughout the next series of the lesson. The second thing this does for us is that we can compare their initial thinking to their final summative thinking and show student growth in the process. So this is a very important step in our lesson. The lesson then continues with a class investigation. And notice, as a class, we are planning the investigation. That's word for word from the evidence statement. This lesson was clearly designed to meet that criteria. Another part, how will we determine what material is vibrating? The students come up with the ideas of what they are going to observe. Again, meeting the criteria of that evidence statement. Now we know K-2, literacy is a very big push. That is when students are actively learning to read. So our K-2 lessons always have some sort of nonfiction reader associated with them so that we can use science as a vehicle to teach literacy. K-2 students are usually excited about science. They love science. And so it's a wonderful way to also get that literacy piece in. So all of our kits are designed to meet the standards. I'm a stickler for this. We go through the evidence statements and I need to see that that lesson is meeting those evidence statements. They're designed to align with the progressions. So modeling at K-2 looks very different than modeling at 3 to 5, which looks different from middle school. And so we make sure that what the students are asked to do in their modeling activities meets that grade level appropriate progression. They are created to be core curriculum, all standards for all students. I'll talk about that in a minute. We use research-based science pedagogy. Ambitious science teaching is the basis for a lot of what we do. This book provides teachers with really a guide for the teacher moves of how to get these practices alive in your classroom. NGSS focuses on the engineering design process, and our lessons do as well. In the kits, you would get all materials that are not typically found in a classroom. And students would then use any device that you have available, whether that be a computer, a laptop, tablet, or iPad. So all standards, all students. It's really important to provide ideas for differentiation for teachers, especially when teachers, a lot of what they're doing is new. I had never taught in 3 dimensions before. These science and engineering practices are new. I had never had to teach that. So to provide teachers with differentiation is very important. So where appropriate in the lessons, we've included areas of differentiation, and usually we give a low level and a high level. In one example, in our engineering design process, advanced students, you might ask them to calculate a budget where they have to add up the cost of everything that they use and they have to stay under budget. You wouldn't do that for lower level students. And we provide those differentiation ideas throughout the lessons where it is appropriate. Again, knowing that this is new for a lot of teachers, we've also included teacher moves. I don't want anybody to think of this like a script. I'm not a big fan of a script, but I think it's important because there's so much discourse and the teacher is trying to move students in a certain direction, providing the moves the teacher would make in the discussion is very important. As teachers get good at it, they'll come up with their own questions, but if this is your first go round, to have a series of kind of back pocket questions ready to go is very beneficial. So throughout the lessons, there are these teacher moves to help the teacher with the practices and to keep those practices very tight to the NGSS. Our K-5 kits are organized by topic. So there's one for each grade level for life science, one for earth and space science, and one for physical science. Middle school, I believe there are 5 kits for each grade level. All of our lessons follow the 5E model. Our engage is the phenomenon, and students are asked to somehow engage in the phenomenon, whether that is with questions or modeling. The explore and the explain have students use the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts to unlock that phenomenon, to begin to scaffold those disciplinary core ideas. The evaluate is really a quick summative assessment. It's meant to be a quick check-in. How are students doing with this PE? Where are they at this point? They are all aligned with the evidence statements as well. The engage the extend very often is a engineering design process. And all of our lessons that have the engineering design process follow this model. It is not just an arts and crafts project where we give kids instructions to build a car, or we give kids instructions to build a boat and then they race the boats. That is not the engineering design process. We always start with a problem, a goal, and then the students work through the process and they build and try until they find something that works. So for example, same grade level, first grade, one of our kits, the students have been studying animal adaptations. And so at the end of this, they watch this video of this girl falling off of her scooter and she face plants. I've actually been in a classroom when the students were watching this, and you could hear everybody go, oh, oh, and the hands were going up because immediately they wanted to talk about the time they fell off their skateboard, they fell off the swing, they fell off their scooter. All first graders have had some experience with this example. Again, personal to them. After they watch the video, they're given a challenge. We want to think about the animal adaptations we've been studying, and we'd like to model a protective device for humans. And their task is to build a protective device for a squishy ball. So each group is given a squishy ball and they're told this is supposed to be like a human, and we need to protect this from a fall. And then the first graders get their materials and they design their protective device. In the procedure, of course, there is a goal. They have a design packet that they work through. We give them some constraints. Again, first grade, a few constraints. We work up to more constraints as we get older. But the biggest constraint would be you can't use any more than 4 materials that we have out on the supply table. And again, that's a big piece of the engineering design process. Once they build their protective devices, they sort of pitch them to the class. And the teacher will ask some questions to really make their thinking visible. It's very important for that student discourse to happen because students learn from other groups about their success and their failure in this design process. At the very end, after they've made their pitch, we ask each individual student to draw the device they would like to use and give a reason why they'd like to use this device. This is a really important step in the process because it's asking students to do real world thinking. At some point in their life, they're all going to be asked, which one of these do you want? Why do you want this one? And trying to teach them about good choices through something as simple as a protective device. And it comes in trying to get those real world, real life skills to come into play and come into action through this engineering design process. The last thing that I'd like to mention is a thank you, and that we are in the process of also developing kind of a hybrid online lesson plan, knowing that the fall is sort of up in the air for a lot of districts. And that's kind of happening over the summer, that there will be, these lessons will be made into a hybrid model just in case teachers are not face-to-face the entire time, so that the kits could be, or the lessons could be used at home and in school, kind of in, as I said, that hybrid model.